Gary. So this morning we're going to discuss a very well-known story in the Bible, but maybe we can look at it in some different ways, gain some different insights. I'm looking forward to your feedback and your input as we go through the morning. This is the story of the test of Abraham, and Isaac's life is to be forfeited. So, this is mostly covering now what we'll study this morning. Mostly covers from Genesis 12 through 22. So we'll do a little bit of background work before we get into the actual event. So we always talk about three promises that God made to Abraham. What were those three promises? Great nation, land, all people will be blessed in him. And that is as far back as beginning in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. So he demonstrates his obedience how? What does God ask him to do? Head to a place he doesn't even know. Leave his kindred. He was how old when God asked him to do this? Anybody remember from the scripture? Well, my age plus 3 years, 75. One of these days, Mike, you got to start teaching more, so I'm not the oldest guy. I think you're a day or two older than me, maybe. Ask him to leave where, and go where. He didn't know where, did he? He said, I'll show you, right? But where did he live at the time? Okay. Okay. So he's in the what we commonly call Ur of the Chaldees. He goes up to Haran, and he ends up, how far, does anybody remember how far south he went with his family? Okay. No, that's right. You're right. Thanks, Miss Barbara. All the way down to Egypt at one point. And I just tried to calculate a little, very roughly, as the crow flies, going the different route and coming back. They probably traveled something close to 1,200 miles before they got back, or when they got back into the land of Canaan. So think about that. Picking up your family. Say, you need to head out. I'll show you the way, but I'll let you know when you get there, basically. And it's not just you, your immediate family. You have belongings. How many of us in here have moved any significant distance? And I'll say more than 5 miles from home, right? Moving is not fun. Even a bad move is, a good move is bad, I think. But it's difficult, isn't it? And imagine 1,200 miles by foot, essentially. Did Abraham ever have any doubts? We talk about how great his faith was. Did he ever have any doubt? Okay. How could he have a child? What about kind of the half-truths he told Abimelech and was it Pharaoh about Sarah being his sister? Was Sarah his sister, by the way? Okay, because we know in Genesis 20, verse 12, he says, besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, this is my brother. And why did he ask her to do that? Apparently she was very pretty. She was beautiful. And he was afraid they'll just kill me once they find out you're my wife. So, he had some concerns there. Did they try to help God along the way with an heir? Yeah. Who were the players there? You remember? What was the handmaiden or the Hagar? Mm-hmm. And she had what child? Ishmael. Okay. That was mostly Sarah initiated that. Yeah, apparently he didn't have his arm twisted to participate in this. And I would dare to say, for most of us in today's age, it's a strange concept that your wife would say, take the lady and have a child by her. Not unknown, but strange. And I was curious how old Ishmael was when Isaac was born. But the best I could figure, he was about 14. So he was a teenager. He'd been around a while. Oh, was Sarah? Did that relationship with Sarah and Hagar, did that work out okay? No, as we might assume when you have emotionally charged relationship with a couple of women, especially. They tend to be a little more emotional than us guys. We just kind of keep it in, and then we let it all out in anger at some point. Didn't work out well. And in fact, we know at a later point, Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away. So also in Genesis 17:17, this was already mentioned by, I think, Shannon, that we're going to have a baby? No, we're not going to have it. Are we ever going to have it? No, we're too old. We're too old. This can't happen. And I thought there was a kind of I kind of enjoyed this part of the passage. Genesis 17:17, it said that Abraham fell face down and he laughed, and he said to himself, will a son be born of a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. So it appears that he's still thinking, now, how could this happen? And we've got Ishmael, and so he can be the heir going forward. But I also like Sarah's response. This reminds me of kids when they get caught at something. In Genesis 18:10, it says, now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have children now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did. It's like being caught out at something. I didn't do that. Yeah, you did. So they both laugh at this because even in biblical times, and we know how old people lived at some points in the Old Testament especially, that to have a child at 90 years old was just, well, that just didn't happen, right? Also, in leading up to what we're really going to discuss in a few minutes, leading up to this, there was a restatement of the promises in Genesis 18, and there was something else significant that was in Genesis 18, being that God told Abraham that the sign of the covenant would be circumcision. And so that occurred during this period of time. So in Genesis 21, new miraculous life. Abraham's 100 years old, Sarah's 90 years old. And there was joy, obviously. But I must say, it's hard for me to imagine having a newborn at 90 and 100 and keeping up with that newborn. Now, I'm guessing that she had help. We know that she had Hagar, but can you imagine having for any of us that are older than 60, can you imagine having a newborn in your house and all the care that takes? But they were elated. And Genesis 21:6 said, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who will hear will laugh with me. All who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, for I have borne him a son in his old age. It seems to me, at least, that in biblical times, Old Testament times, we'll say, having an heir was so important. We live in a time today when it's not uncommon for couples to decide they don't want any children. They're not going to have kids. But boy, back then, it was really, really important to have the heir, all that went with the heir, and all that entailed. So Ishmael's not going to be the heir. But is Ishmael going to be significant? He's going to have nations that come after him, right? Or he's going to have a kind of a people of his own. So Ishmael's not going to be the guy. Isaac's got to be the one. So then we get to chapter 22, which is really the heart of the study this morning. And by the way, when I first thought about this class and the quarter we're in, and it's bread and life, and I thought, there's no bread in this story that I can think of, but there is life. Thankfully, I recognize that. But so here's the test, and that's God speaking to Abraham. Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Let that, if you're Abraham, just let that sink in for a minute. You waited 100 years to have an heir. Now you've got him. You got a healthy boy. Now he's not a baby anymore. He's matured some. And now I'm to take him and sacrifice. Can you think of some significant mountains or mounts what are some significant mounts in the Bible? This would be one, I would think, wouldn't you? Okay. What's that? Mount Sinai? Okay. Mount Sinai, thank you, where the law was given. What other mountain? What about New Testament mountains or mounts? Mount of Transfiguration, Mount of Olives, Mount Calvary, also Golgotha. Okay, so there are a lot of significant, Mount Gerizim, Mount Nebo. There are a lot of mountains in the Bible that play significant roles. We see from this passage it says, "Take you to the land of Moriah," and on a mountain that I will show you. There are two other occasions, and I'll give you really brownie points on this one if you know these about Mount Moriah, both in the Old Testament, where the mount is significant. One of them is pretty obscure, I must say. No, that's not what I'm thinking about, but thank you for trying. No? Yes, ma'am. Wow, there's one. Good job, Lisa. Okay, Mount Moriah was where Solomon built the temple. Okay, the other one is pretty obscure, and it's in 2 Solomon 24. David had asked that his fighting men be that there be a census taken of the fighting men. How did God typically look at taking a census or numbering the people? Favorably or unfavorably? Typically. And why not? Okay. He didn't authorize it, and it didn't show that you have the faith in me. Whatever the numbers are, forget that. We saw that with Gideon, right? It also extended at times to chariots and horses, didn't it? How many chariots and horses? Doesn't matter. We have God on our side. So David had this census taken, and God sent a plague on the people. David bought a threshing floor from a fellow there at Mount Moriah, and he erected an altar there, and God stayed the plague. So it's just a little bit of trivia. You'll forget that in 10 minutes or maybe 5, but that's okay. So, what could Abraham have been thinking? Here's some of my thoughts, but what do you think? You've just been told, take your son, your only son. Now, technically, he's not his only son, but he's his only son by Sarah. He's the son of promise. Take him and sacrifice him. Well, I thought it'd be uneasy at best. Like, I don't know how this is going to work out, but, or dread at worst. Conflicting thoughts. Why is God demanding this of me? Shannon. Okay. I had not heard of that, but mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She was sharing that with the Chaldean culture, it was not uncommon for human sacrifice, and so they had seen that, and so maybe it wasn't as shocking as it would be otherwise. Yes, Mike? Right, and we'll get to that in just a minute. That's exactly where we're going. Yes, ma'am. So my third point there under the other is, how could the promise be fulfilled without Isaac? Right? You're asking me to kill him. How can this work? And by the way, Mike brought up the point about, later we'll read in Hebrews where Abraham was thinking, well, he must resurrect him from the dead. Based upon what? Had there been any that we know of? At this point in the history of the Bible, had there been any people resurrected from the dead? Raised from the dead? No. Nothing's recorded anyway. So it wasn't like he said, I've seen this before. No problem. You know, God will raise him from the dead. Because I've seen this before. He hadn't seen it before. So, you know, Abraham's only human, and he's a father. And I'm sure he's a proud father. And he must be really conflicted about how this is going to work out. Yes, Greg. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. For those of you maybe didn't hear it, he says, What was Sarah thinking at this time? Okay, you guys are going off to the wilderness for a few days. Why? Did he tell her? I don't know. At that point, it seems to be just between him and God, because even when Isaac asked him a question later, he doesn't tell him exactly. Yeah, God will provide. Yeah. Oh, you guys are so good this morning. You're right on top of it. So I know this is a little small, but this we do know. There's a lot of things we don't know. And I think that's a great question about Sarah. But there's just a lot we don't know. But there's no evidence of his hesitation, is there? Did he lay around all morning and it got to be, it's 2 o'clock, I guess we ought to get on the road? Was that how he handled it? And it say he rose up early in the morning? And he traveled until, on the third day, they found the spot that God directed him to, and he built an altar. And if you're Isaac at this point, you're probably thinking, this is one of my questions. What was Isaac? You know, I mean, I know he asked, where's the sacrifice? We've got the wood, and, you know. And maybe Isaac at that point is still feeling, yeah, we're here to, we got to find an animal to sacrifice. And so he builds the altar, and then he binds up Isaac. Now, I'm just wondering what in the world is going through Isaac's mind. And maybe what is Abraham saying to Isaac as he's doing this? And there's nothing in the scriptures that says that Isaac resisted him, that he, you know, just him and his father, the servants, had been left behind, and as she said, he said, we will return, we go to sacrifice and we will return. So he raises his hand to slay Isaac. Even if I'm confident that I kill Isaac and God is going to raise him from the dead, if you're Abraham, that's got to be a really gut-wrenching moment. I know you've dealt with animals a lot, and you've probably had to euthanize a lot of animals guessing, unfortunately. And as you all, I was city boy, never raised on, never had to go out and slaughter a hog or a cow or whatever. I would have a lot of trouble just doing that. I can't imagine thinking I'm going to plunge this knife into my child. But then that's just me. Maybe somebody else feels differently about that, but Miss Barbara. You keep getting ahead of me. But thank you. She said, God does not ask us to kill our children, but he does ask us to put him ahead of our children. And that can be very, very difficult. All right, so let's move ahead. We talked a little bit a minute ago about what could Abraham have been thinking, but what was he thinking? It was ultimately trusting God, wasn't it? Maybe uncertainty about how God was going to work it out, but he knew that God could fix anything. And as referenced already, he said, and we are directed that way because he said to his servants, the lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will return back to you. So he could have been thinking a lot of things, but evidently what he was thinking was, God's going to make this right. I don't know exactly how he's going to make it right, but he'll make it right. There's a very well-known passage, already alluded to, I believe, in Hebrews 11. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. Hold it. He didn't kill Isaac. Why does it say he offered up Isaac? He didn't kill him. He was willing. Okay, he was willing. What else? This side's awfully quiet over here this morning. Except for Greg. Thank you, Greg. Yes. Right. Yeah. He was willing, and in his mind, he had just the same as killed him already. And in a way, in God's mind, Abraham's killed him because he's willing to do this, and he's going to do it. That makes sense? I guess it does because nobody's saying it doesn't. Yes. Human? Human? Oh, okay. Right. And what happens if Isaac is dead and never is revived? What happens to the promise? It doesn't work, does it? Yeah, so it has to happen. Right. Thanks. Okay, so finishing this passage, he offered up Isaac, and he who received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. That's pretty great faith, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to read this. Just, you kind of read it as a Bible story, and I just think about being a father, an earthly father, and for all of you earthly fathers, that's tremendous faith. Think I'm going to kill him, but God's going to raise him. It's okay. There you go, Tony, jumping ahead. Thanks, Tony. Yes, exactly. And we'll talk about that in a second. Exactly. There are a lot of parallels, aren't there? Yes, sir. So, maybe some thoughts and applications here. Luke 14:26. Miss Barber, this may kind of come into your thought process here earlier, where he says, if anyone comes to me, this is Jesus, and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Greg sent me a link to a sermon. I can't remember the name of the sermon now, Greg. Maybe you do. And it talked a lot about loving God more, loving Christ more than anything and anybody. And is that always easy? Doris? Yeah. He was sharing that many times it's difficult for those that perhaps even know or feel or know they need to be baptized, to be brought into the church, that they have family members that are totally against it, or they feel like they're indicting those family members, or it will ruin relationships, and it very well may. And we've actually got an example or two maybe here in this congregation where that was a consideration for that person. And that's a sacrifice, isn't it? That's stepping out there and really taking a chance with some other aspects of your life. But the most important thing is our relationship with God. Other comments, thoughts on that? It's not an easy one for the most part. I mean, it takes some courage to. Yes, Dan. Okay. 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 So that could be a lesson. That would be lessons that Isaac may have learned from this whole event. What? Any other lessons that Abraham may have learned from this? I don't know. Just asking. It certainly confirmed his faith in God. I don't know if there would be anything else that Abraham, that's the most significant. Yes, sir. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Trust in God and wait on God, right? I think I have my timetable, God. Oh, that's not necessarily yours. I have. How many of you have ever had a situation and you pray to God, I need you to help me work this out, or I need this work, help somebody work this out. And you think, I see the path that can happen. That I see the way that can happen. And it happens, but in a totally different way than you thought or I thought. I don't know how many times, I feel like I've had a lot of times in my life where that has happened. It's like, well, we got the outcome we were looking for, but it surely didn't happen the way I thought it was. So, yeah, he needed to learn. We're on God's schedule. And maybe that was, yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And, yes. Yeah. He got on with it, didn't he? Right. Yeah. Yeah. An eagerness to obey and an eagerness to get on with it. This is what I have to do. I'm doing it. No hesitation. We got just a couple of minutes left. I want to get around to what Tony was leading us to earlier, and that is, let's think about parallels between this event and Jesus. So I thought of a couple of things. The scripture makes a point of saying, take your son, your only son. Where do we hear that again? Of course, we hear that about Christ. The 3 days, they arrived on the third day to the place of sacrifice. Sacrifice on the hilltop. And in a sense, we know that there was a complete resurrection, the full event with Christ, but there was, in a sense, a resurrection with Isaac, because, as we've said, in Abraham's eyes, and I think in God's view, Isaac was as good as sacrifice. So I see those parallels. Do you see other parallels with anything with this event and with Jesus? Well, one other parallel would be promise, wouldn't it? I just thought of that. Through Isaac, these promises would be fulfilled. Through Jesus, promises are fulfilled. Okay. That's my turn. I'm waiting for somebody else now. Come on. Anybody else? Oh, very good. Biologically, neither one of these came into the world in a normal way, did they? Jesus immaculately, and Isaac with coming into the world at the age of his parents. Good point. Anything else? You got one more? Okay. In about a year. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And you did make a talk on this a month ago, maybe? Yeah. And I think to your point, and I remembered it when reading it, it said, who came to visit? The Lord came to visit. There were two others, but the Lord came to visit. So, yeah, good point. That it appears that Jesus had a key part in how this unfolded. Got a minute left. I'll let you go early if you don't have anything else, because I don't. Thanks for your participation.